Blood tastes like pennies and battery acid. I learned that the hard way, choking on my own while the man I loved sobbed. Not for me, but because the spray had ruined his suede loafers. I died a martyr for an absolute coward. But waking up 5 minutes before that exact same hollow point bullet left the chamber? That rewires your brain. This time, I didn't lunge. I just took a step back. Watching his supposed soulmate leave him bleeding on the damp concrete? Absolutely priceless. Exhaust fumes and stale urine. That was the first thing that hit me. Not the blinding white light of the afterlife, not a choir of angels, just the heavy, humid stink of level C in the downtown parking garage. My lungs hitched, pulling in air so sharply it burned. I pressed my palm against my sternum. There was no hole there. My fingers met solid bone and the stiff cotton of my trench coat. No sticky warmth, no shattered ribs. I blinked against the flickering fluorescent light overhead. It buzzed, a low, dying wasp sound that vibrated right behind my molars. "Are you even listening to me, Harper?" The voice scraped down my spine like rusty iron. Caleb. He was standing 3 feet away, his car keys dangling from his manicured index finger. He looked exactly as he had the moment before I died. Crisp navy blazer, styled hair, a petulant, annoyed twist to his mouth. He was complaining about the risotto at the restaurant. "Too mushy," he'd said. Beside him stood Riley. She was scrolling through her phone, pretending to be invisible, playing the part of the innocent mutual friend who just happened to be tagging along. I could smell her perfume from here, cloying vanilla and something sharp, like alcohol. In my last life, I thought she was just a third wheel. It wasn't until I was bleeding out on this exact slab of concrete that Caleb had grabbed her hand, ignoring my gasps for air, begging her to stay safe. My skin went ice cold. The nausea hit me so fast I swayed, my heels clicking against the asphalt. I was back. 5 minutes before the end. "Honestly, you space out half the time," Caleb muttered, turning his back to me to unlock his Audi. The headlights flashed twice, illuminating the concrete pillars in stark, unforgiving white. Then came the sound, a heavy, rhythmic scuffing, rubber soles dragging slightly on the gritty floor. My heart slammed against my ribs. I knew exactly what was walking out from behind the concrete pillar of section C4. A man in a dark, oversized hoodie. His face was obscured by a cheap blue medical mask, but I remembered the erratic, twitchy energy rolling off him. He wasn't a professional. He was desperate, shaking, and high. "Keys, wallet, watch." The guy's voice cracked. He stepped into the pool of yellow overhead light, raising his right hand. The metal of the handgun looked dull, scratched, heavy. Caleb froze. The annoyance vanished from his face, replaced instantly by a pale, slack-jawed terror. His keys hit the ground with a sharp jingle. In the timeline that ended with me in a body bag, this was the exact second Caleb tried to play the hero. He hadn't done it to protect me. He had done it because his ego couldn't handle being punked in front of Riley. He had puffed out his chest, taken half a step forward, and yelled something stupid. The mugger had panicked. The trigger had slipped, and I, like an absolute idiot, had thrown my body across the gap. I had taken the .38 round straight through the lung to spare him. Not this time. "Hey man, back off," Caleb stammered. His voice shook. He didn't puff out his chest this time. He took a step backward, bumping directly into Riley, who let out a sharp, pathetic squeak. The mugger's hand trembled. The barrel of the gun waved in small, chaotic circles. I said, give me the watch. You rich piece of... I didn't think. I didn't plan. Instinct, raw and screaming from a body that remembered dying, took over. I shifted my weight to my back foot. I didn't shout. I didn't throw my hands up. I just took one long, deliberate step backward, sliding out of the line of fire, melting into the shadows beside a parked SUV. Caleb noticed the movement. He looked at me, confusion knitting his perfectly groomed eyebrows together. Harper? He expected me to do something. He expected me to fix it. I always fixed it. Shut up! The mugger screamed, startled by Caleb turning his head. The guy's finger tightened. It wasn't a clean sound. It was a deafening, concussive crack that bounced off the concrete walls and slapped the air out of the garage. I didn't close my eyes. I watched the muzzle flash, a brief, violent burst of orange in the gloom. Caleb jerked backward as if he'd been kicked in the chest by a horse. The breath left him in a wet, awful sound, a mix of a cough and a gasp. He crumpled. His knees hit the oil-stained concrete first, followed by his shoulder. He landed hard, right beside the front tire of his precious car. For 2 seconds, absolute silence descended on level C. The buzzing of the broken light fixture seemed deafening. Then, Riley started screaming. Riley's scream wasn't cinematic. It wasn't the tragic wail of a lover watching her soulmate fall. It was the shrill, ugly shriek of an animal caught in a trap. The shooter stood frozen for a fraction of a second, staring at the body on the ground, before the reality of the noise snapped him out of it. He turned on his heel, rubber soles squeaking loudly against the floor, and bolted toward the stairwell. He didn't even grab the dropped keys or the watch Caleb had been unbuckling. I stayed pressed against the cold metal of the SUV. The metal was damp, leaving condensation on the sleeves of my coat. I tasted the copper in my mouth again, a phantom memory of my own blood. But as I inhaled, I only smelled cordite and exhaust. I was completely intact. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" Riley shrieked. She was standing 3 feet from Caleb. He was on his back, his hands clawing uselessly at his right shoulder. Blood, dark and thick, was already spreading rapidly across the white cotton of his expensive dress shirt, pooling into the dark fabric of his blazer. "Riley," Caleb choked out. His voice was a wet gurgle. He reached his left hand out toward her. His fingers were shaking, smeared with his own blood. "Help." I watched from the shadows. I felt nothing. No panic. No urge to rush forward with pressure and soothing words. My chest felt hollowed out, scraped clean of the pathetic devotion that had anchored me to this man for 3 years. I was just an audience member now. Riley looked at his outstretched hand. She looked at the blood pooling on the asphalt, creeping slowly toward the toe of her designer ankle boots. Her eyes went wide, white all around the irises. She looked at the stairwell where the shooter had disappeared, then back at Caleb. "Riley, please," he wheezed, coughing. A thin line of red spilled down his chin. She didn't drop to her knees. She didn't tear her scarf off to make a tourniquet. She didn't even pull out her phone to call for help. Riley took a step back, then another. "I can't!" she gasped, her voice trembling violently. "I can't be here! The police! My husband! I can't!" Caleb's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. He tried to prop himself up on his elbow, but his arm gave out, and he collapsed back onto the concrete with a wet slap. "Riley?" She turned around, and she ran. The sound of her heels clicking against the concrete was erratic, a panicked, staccato rhythm echoing through the empty garage. Click, clack, click, clack, fading faster and faster. She didn't look back. She just left him there to choke on the pavement. The silence she left behind was heavy. Caleb laid there, his chest heaving irregularly, staring down the empty ramp where the love of his life had just vanished. The betrayal on his face was raw, ugly, and entirely foreign to him. He had never been the one left behind. I finally pushed myself off the side of the SUV. My footsteps were slow, measured. Caleb heard my approach. He forced his head to roll to the side. When he saw me, his eyes filled with a desperate, pathetic relief. "Harper," he gasped, his teeth stained pink. "Harper, help me. It hurts. God, it hurts." I stopped just out of reach of the expanding puddle of blood. I looked down at him. The smell of copper was real now, rising up from the ground. He looked so small. All the arrogance, the condescension, the quiet smirks he shared with Riley behind my back. Gone. Erased by a single bullet. I reached into my trench coat pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen cast a cool blue light over my face. I unlocked it, pulling up the dial pad. "Harper, what are you doing?" he whimpered, trying to reach for my ankle. I took a half step back, keeping my shoes clean. I dialed 911. "Hold on," I said, my voice completely flat. "Call in an ambulance." I put the phone to my ear. It rang twice. 911, what's your emergency?" The operator's voice was crisp. "Yes, I'm at the underground parking garage on 5th and Main. Level C. A man has been shot." I looked down at Caleb. He was shivering now, shock setting in. His skin was turning the color of wet ash. "Are you with the victim, ma'am? Is the shooter still on the scene?" "I'm with him. The shooter fled on foot." "Okay, help is on the way. Can you apply pressure to the wound?" I stared at Caleb. He was looking at me, his eyes begging. He needed me to kneel in the dirt. He needed me to ruin my clothes, to panic, to cry over him, to validate his suffering. "I can't do that," I told the operator calmly. "I don't have anything sterile, and I'm not comfortable touching the blood." Caleb let out a choked, sobbing sound. "Harper, please." "Help is on the way, sir," I said, pocketing my phone. I crossed my arms over my chest, pulling my coat tighter against the garage chill. "Just try not to move." I stood there for 7 minutes. 7 minutes of listening to him wheeze, watching the reality of his own mortality and his utter isolation wash over him. He kept looking toward the ramp where Riley had run. I didn't say a word. I just watched him bleed, completely untouched. Hospitals always smell like a lie. They smell like bleach, alcohol swabs, and industrial floor wax, trying to mask the underlying scent of decay and human panic. I sat in the plastic, mustard yellow chair of the emergency waiting room for 3 hours. The fabric was scratchy against the back of my legs. I hadn't cried. I hadn't paced. I just sat there, drinking a lukewarm black coffee from a vending machine that tasted like burnt plastic, staring at the mute television playing an infomercial in the corner. Occasionally, a nurse would walk by and give me a sympathetic look. They saw a woman sitting alone, waiting for her fiancé who was in surgery for a gunshot wound. They assumed I was in shock. It was easier to let them think that than to explain that my resting heart rate hadn't spiked past 70 since the ambulance doors closed. Eventually, a doctor in green scrubs pushed through the double doors. He looked exhausted, rubbing the bridge of his nose before scanning the mostly empty room. "Family of Caleb Davis?" I stood up, tossing my empty coffee cup into a nearby bin. I walked over, my posture perfect. "I'm his fiancée." The word felt like sandpaper on my tongue, but it was the necessary key to get the information I wanted. "He's stable," the doctor said, his shoulders dropping slightly. The bullet shattered his right clavicle, and nicked the upper lobe of his lung. We had to put in a chest tube, and he's going to need a lot of physical therapy to regain full use of that arm, but he's incredibly lucky. An inch lower, and it would have hit an artery. I nodded slowly. Incredibly lucky. If he only knew. Can I see him? He's drifting in and out of consciousness from the anesthesia and painkillers. But yes, just keep it brief. I followed the doctor through the heavy doors, down a hallway lined with beeping monitors and the low murmurs of night shift staff. We stopped at Bay 4. The curtain was pulled back. Caleb lay in the center of a narrow, sterile bed. He looked horrific. His skin was pasty, tinged with a sickly yellow from the hospital lighting. A thick, bulky bandage strapped his right shoulder and chest tightly, and clear tubing snaked out from under the hospital gown, carrying dark fluid to a canister on the floor. His left arm was strapped to an IV board. I stepped into the room. The rhythmic beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor was the only sound. I walked over and stood at the foot of the bed. I didn't reach for his hand. I didn't stroke his forehead. I just observed the damage. His eyelids fluttered. The heavy drugs made his movement sluggish. He licked his chapped lips, squinting against the harsh overhead light until his eyes focused on my face. For a second, there was blank confusion. Then, the memory hit him. His heart monitor spiked, the tempo speeding up into an anxious trill. "Harper," he croaked. His throat was dry, his voice a pathetic whisper. "I'm here," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. He moved his head weakly, his eyes darting to the empty chairs in the corner, to the gap in the privacy curtain, then back to me. His left hand twitched on the blanket. "Where?" He swallowed hard, wincing in pain. "Where is she?" I could have played dumb. I could have asked him who he meant. But I didn't have the patience for games anymore. My tolerance for his bullshit had died on a concrete floor in a past life. "Riley?" I asked, my tone conversational, as if asking about the weather. He didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. He looked away, shame flushing his pale cheeks. "She didn't come to the hospital, Caleb," I said, stepping closer to the side of the bed, resting my hands on the cold metal railing. "She hasn't called. She hasn't texted. As far as I know, she hasn't stopped running since she left you coughing up blood by the front tire of your car." "She was scared," he whispered defensively, his eyes filling with tears of self-pity. "The gun. I was there too," I reminded him quietly. "I didn't run. But I didn't exactly step in front of the bullet for you either, did I?" Caleb looked back at me, genuinely confused. The painkillers were making it hard for him to track my tone. He was used to me being soft, accommodating, endlessly forgiving. The ice in my voice was short-circuiting his brain. You froze," he tried to rationalize. He was offering me an out, a way to excuse my lack of heroics so he could maintain his illusion of my devotion. It happened so fast. I leaned in closer. I could smell the harsh antiseptic on his skin, the faint metallic tang of old sweat. "I didn't freeze Caleb. I saw him pull the trigger, and I actively moved out of the way. I chose not to save you." His breath hitched. The monitor beeped erratically. He stared at me, his pupils dilated from the morphine, trying to find the lie in my face. He found nothing. No remorse, no guilt, just a cold, hard vacuum where my love used to be. "Why?" he choked out, a single tear slipping down his temple and into his hair. Because I finally saw exactly what you are, I said softly, straightening up. And I realized I'd rather watch you bleed than ruin my coat. I turned away from the bed. I didn't look back as I walked out of the bay, leaving him utterly alone with the rhythmic, mocking beep of his own heart. Dust danced in the sliver of morning sunlight slicing through the heavy blackout curtains of our shared apartment. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom, the key still biting into my palm. In my previous life, I never came back here. My life ended on cold concrete, and this apartment became a shrine Caleb used to garner sympathy from wealthy clients. I used to think the smell of this place, sandalwood, expensive espresso, and the subtle lavender fabric softener I meticulously bought, was the smell of home. Now, it just smelled like a trap. I dropped my keys onto the glass entryway table. The clatter was sharp, too loud for the quiet space. My chest throbbed. It was a phantom ache right under my left breast, a psychosomatic echo from a timeline that no longer existed. I rubbed the spot absent-mindedly, walking past the framed photos of Caleb and me smiling in Napa, Caleb and me skiing in Aspen. He was always in the foreground. I was always an accessory, blurring into the background. I didn't grab a garbage bag. I didn't frantically throw his things out the window in a fit of hysterical rage. Rage is hot, messy, and exhausts you. I was operating on absolute zero. I walked into the walk-in closet and pulled down my hard-shell suitcase. The zipper snagged halfway. I yanked it, the metallic ripping sound immensely satisfying, and laid it open on the duvet. I started with the practical things. Passports, birth certificates, the deed to the property, which was entirely in my name, purchased with my inheritance. Caleb had balked at signing the prenup, calling it unromantic, but I had held firm. A rare moment of spine in a decade of bending over backward. Thank God for it. I was folding a stack of silk blouses when I heard it, the faint, metallic slide of a key in the front door lock. The brass deadbolt clicked. The hinges whined softly. "Caleb?" a voice called out, hushed and trembling. I froze. My fingers dug into the slick fabric of the blouse. Riley. Footsteps padded cautiously across the hardwood of the living room. She was wearing the same designer ankle boots from last night, though the click-clack rhythm was much slower now, devoid of the frantic panic that had carried her away from a bleeding man. I stepped out of the bedroom and leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Riley stopped dead in the hallway. She looked like hell. Her mascara was smudged into dark, bruised-looking half-moons under her eyes. Her hair was a tangled rat's nest, and she was clutching her oversized leather tote bag against her chest like a shield. When she saw me, all the color drained from her face, leaving her a sickly, mottled gray. "Harper!" she gasped, her knuckles turning white on the straps of her bag. You're not at the hospital." "Neither are you," I replied. My voice was a flat line. No inflection, no anger, just an observation. She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. Her eyes darted to the suitcase visible on the bed behind me. "How is he? The news this morning? They said a man was shot downtown. I tried calling him, but it went to voicemail." She was fishing. She didn't know how much I knew, or rather, she didn't know how much I remembered in the chaos of the shooting. She was banking on the idea that I had been too traumatized, too focused on the gun, to notice her cowardly exit. Or worse, to notice the intimate way Caleb had reached for her. "He's in recovery?" I said, watching her carefully. "Shattered collarbone, punctured lung. He lost a lot of blood." Riley pressed a hand to her mouth, tears instantly welling in her eyes. It was a practiced reaction. I used to think she was just highly empathetic. Now I recognized the theatricality of it. "Oh my God," she sobbed, a wet, ugly sound. "That's horrible. It all happened so fast. When that guy pulled the gun, I panicked. I ran to get help." I tilted my head, studying her the way a biologist studies a particularly repulsive insect under glass. "Is that right?" I asked. "Yes. I ran up to the street to flag down a cop, but my phone was dead, and I was so disoriented," she stammered, the lies spilling out of her in a desperate, tangled rush. "By the time I found my way back, the ambulance was already driving away. I swear, Harper, I was so scared for you both. You have a key to my apartment, Riley." The words dropped into the space between us, heavy and cold. Riley's mouth snapped shut. The tears stopped tracking down her cheeks. She looked down at her left hand, where my spare house key was still pinched between her thumb and forefinger. "Caleb gave it to me," she whispered, her voice dropping an octave, losing the hysterical edge. "To feed the cat, when you guys went to Cabo last month." "We don't own a cat." Silence stretched out, thick and suffocating. The low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen suddenly sounded like a jet engine. I pushed off the doorframe and took a slow, deliberate step toward her. She instinctively took a step back, her boots scraping loudly against the wood. "You didn't run to get help," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You ran because you didn't want the police asking why you were in a parking garage at 11 p.m. with a man who wasn't your husband. You ran because Caleb was bleeding out, and he suddenly wasn't a fun, secret thrill anymore. He was a liability." "Harper, please, you're in shock." "And you came here this morning?" I continued, ignoring her entirely. "Not to check on the cat we don't own. You came to scrub this apartment of anything you left behind before I came home to pack his hospital bag. You came for your toothbrush, maybe a spare pair of underwear hidden in his gym bag. You came to cover your tracks." Riley's jaw trembled. The mask of the concerned best friend completely fractured, revealing the terrified, cornered woman underneath. "Are you going to tell my husband?" she asked. The selfishness of the question was staggering. Her lover was lying in a hospital bed with a tube in his chest, and her only concern was her own marriage to a man who bankrolled her lifestyle. I looked at her, feeling an immense, crushing exhaustion. I was so tired of these people. "Leave the key on the table, Riley," I said, turning my back on her and walking back into the bedroom. "And lock the door behind you." I didn't wait to see if she obeyed. I heard the sharp clatter of brass on glass, followed by the frantic pulling of the front door. She was gone, running away just as fast as she had the night before. The precinct smelled exactly like I imagined purgatory would. A pungent blend of stale donuts, floor wax, and the metallic tang of old adrenaline. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly green pallor over everyone in the room. I sat in a hard plastic chair, my posture unnaturally rigid. Across the scarred laminate desk sat Detective Ramirez. He was a heavy-set man with dark, exhausted eyes and a tie that looked like it had been knotted in the dark. He kept clicking a cheap ballpoint pen. Click, clack, click, clack. "So, Ms. Sullivan," Ramirez said, consulting a legal pad filled with cramped handwriting, "let me make sure I have this timeline right. You, Mr. Davis, and Mrs. Vance, excuse me, Mrs. Trent, were leaving the restaurant. You entered level C of the garage at approximately 11:14 p.m. "That is correct," I said. My voice was steady. I had spent the entire cab ride over compartmentalizing the lingering nausea from the lack of sleep. Ramirez stopped clicking the pen. He looked up at me, his brow furrowing slightly. Detectives deal with hysterical victims all the time. They are used to sobbing, to fragmented sentences, to people needing water and a moment to breathe. They are not used to a woman whose fiancé was shot hours ago, sitting as still as a stone carving, delivering facts like she was reading a grocery list. The shooter demanded valuables. Mr. Davis attempted to intervene. Caleb yelled at him and took a step forward. I corrected, resting my hands neatly in my lap. The assailant panicked and fired one shot. Caleb fell. Ramirez leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. "And what did you do, Ms. Sullivan?" I met his gaze directly. I stepped backward behind a parked vehicle to avoid the line of fire. "You didn't try to render aid?" "I am not a medical professional, detective. The shooter was armed and erratic. I prioritized my own safety until he fled the scene, at which point I immediately dialed 911. Ramirez let out a slow, deliberate breath. He picked up his pen again, but didn't click it. "Mrs. Trent gave a statement earlier this morning." I felt a small, dark thrill of anticipation. "Did she?" "She stated she was paralyzed with fear, that she fled the garage to attempt to find a patrol officer on the street level because her cell phone was dead." I let a beat of silence pass. I wanted him to feel the weight of the pause. "Detective Ramirez?" I said, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. "Did you secure the security footage from the Level C exit ramp?" "We pulled the tapes an hour ago. We're reviewing them." "When you do, pay close attention to the timestamp. Riley ran up the ramp at 11:16 p.m. You will see her exit the pedestrian door onto 5th Avenue. If you check the exterior cameras of the bank across the street, you won't see her flagging down a patrol car. You will see her hail a yellow cab at exactly 11:18 p.m. She got in and drove away." Ramirez's eyes narrowed. The exhausted slump in his shoulders vanished, replaced by the sharp posture of a cop catching the scent of a lie. "She abandoned the scene," I continued coldly. "She didn't call 911. You can check her phone records. Her battery wasn't dead. She just didn't want to be associated with the incident." "Why wouldn't she want to be associated?" Ramirez asked, testing me. "Because she was having an affair with my fiancé," I said. The words tasted like ash, but they didn't hurt anymore, and being interviewed by the police at midnight would be very difficult to explain to her husband. Ramirez leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked loudly. He stared at me for a long time. He was trying to figure me out. A woman betrayed by her fiancé and her friend, watching the man get shot, and sitting here detailing the logistics without shedding a single tear. "That's quite a motive to leave a man bleeding on the ground," Ramirez said quietly. "It is," I agreed. "It's cowardice." "And you, Ms. Sullivan?" He pressed softly. "Did you leave him bleeding on the ground because of cowardice, or because you knew about the affair?" The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. He was probing, wondering if I had somehow orchestrated this, or if my lack of action was a crime of omission fueled by spite. "I didn't know about the affair until I saw him reaching for her instead of me while he was choking on his own blood," I said, lying flawlessly. In this life, I hadn't known. Only the ghost in my head knew the truth of what came before. I stepped back because I wanted to live, detective. Caleb stepped forward because his ego demanded an audience. One of those choices resulted in a bullet. I don't feel guilty for surviving. Ramirez wrote something down on his pad, the scratching of the pen loud in the small room. "We'll need you to sign your statement," he said, pushing the paper toward me. I took the pen from his fingers. The plastic was warm. I signed my name with a fluid, unbroken line. Will Caleb be charged with anything? I asked as I handed it back. No, Ramirez said, looking puzzled. He's the victim. Right, I murmured, standing up and smoothing the wrinkles from my trench coat. Just checking. Because he wouldn't be a victim for long. Not if I had anything to do with it. Corporate offices have a distinct temperature. It's always a few degrees too cold, designed to keep people awake, moving, and anxious. The glass doors of Apex Communications slid open with a soft whoosh. The lobby smelled sharply of ozone from the massive printers and the faint, bitter aroma of dark roast coffee from the break room. I walked past the receptionist, ignoring her startled greeting. She knew who I was. Everyone here knew who I was. I was the reason Caleb had a corner office. My father's connections had opened the door. Caleb's slick charm had merely kept it from shutting. The floor was a hive of activity. Keyboards clattered, phones rang in muted tones, and people spoke in the low, urgent whispers reserved for high-stakes PR crises. As I walked down the main aisle, the noise died away in a wave. Heads popped up over cubicle walls. Eyes tracked my progress. They had all heard the news. Caleb Davis, the golden boy, had taken a bullet in a botched robbery. He was probably a legend right now in the Slack channels. A tragic, brave hero. I didn't stop at his empty office. I bypassed his desk, which was littered with protein shaker bottles and vanity awards, and walked straight toward the frosted glass doors at the end of the hall. I didn't knock. I just pushed the door open. Greg looked up from his dual monitors. He was a ruthless man in his 50s, with thinning hair and a suit that cost more than a compact car. He was Caleb's boss, but more importantly, he was a man who valued optics above human life. "Harper," Greg said, standing up quickly, a mask of deep, practiced concern snapping into place. "My God, we just heard. I was going to send flowers to the hospital. How is he? How are you holding up?" "Don't send flowers, Greg. He's allergic to lilies, and I won't be there to take them home anyway," I said, closing the door behind me. The heavy glass shut out the murmurs of the bullpen. Greg blinked, his professional smile faltering. Excuse me?" I walked over to the leather guest chairs and sat down, crossing one leg over the other. "Caleb is stable. He'll survive," I said. "But I'm here to talk about his future at Apex." Greg slowly sank back into his ergonomic chair. He was sharp. He instantly recognized the tone of my voice. This wasn't a grieving fiancé seeking comfort. This was a business transaction. "What about his future?" Greg asked cautiously. "I understand Caleb is currently managing the rollout for the new tech merger," I said, referencing the multi-million-dollar account I had personally introduced to the firm 6 months ago. "He is, and he's doing stellar work. We'll obviously reassign it temporarily while he recovers." "Reassign it permanently," I interrupted. Greg's eyebrows shot up. "Harper, I know you're distressed, but Caleb has been bleeding for this account. No pun intended. He's our point man." "Your point man," I said, leaning forward, resting my elbows on my knees, "was shot because he provoked an armed volatile addict in a parking garage in an attempt to show off for his mistress." The silence in the office was absolute. The only sound was the faint hum of the air vents. Greg's mouth parted slightly. He was a PR man. His brain was immediately spinning the implications. The fallout, the sheer ugliness of the scandal if it leaked. "Mistress?" Greg repeated, the words sounding dirty in the sterile office. "Riley Trent," I provided smoothly. "Wife of Harrison Trent. I believe Harrison's real estate firm just signed a massive retainer with Apex last quarter. Correct?" Greg's face lost its color. It was beautiful to watch. The blood drained from his cheeks as the dominoes fell in his mind. If Harrison Trent found out his wife was sleeping with an Apex executive, and that said, executive got shot while on a late-night rendezvous with her, Trent would pull his contracts so fast it would give the firm whiplash. "Are you certain?" Greg asked, his voice tight, the sympathetic boss routine entirely abandoned for corporate survival mode. "I was standing right next to them," I said. "The police have it on record. Riley fled the scene to avoid the scandal. Caleb is currently lying in a hospital bed, hopped up on morphine, sending emails on his phone, trying to control the narrative." I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. Caleb had texted me 6 times in the last hour. Long, rambling, pitiful messages begging me to come back to the hospital, begging me not to tell anyone about Riley, claiming it was a momentary lapse in judgment. I unlocked the phone and slid it across the polished mahogany desk. Greg picked it up. He read the texts. As his eyes scanned the screen, his expression hardened into granite. Caleb wasn't a hero anymore. He was a walking, talking PR disaster, holding a lit match next to the firm's biggest accounts. "He's a liability, Greg," I said softly, driving the final nail into the coffin. "And my father's connections, the people I brought to this firm, they value loyalty and discretion. Caleb possesses neither. If he returns to this office, those accounts leave with me." It wasn't a threat. It was a weather report. Greg set the phone down. He looked at me, seeing me perhaps for the first time. I wasn't just the quiet fiancé who showed up at the holiday parties in a nice dress. I was the architect of Caleb's success, and I was currently rigged with explosives, ready to demolish the building. "I'll have HR draft the severance paperwork immediately," Greg said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "We will frame it as a mutually agreed departure due to medical trauma. He'll receive a standard package, but his keycard will be deactivated by noon." "Generous of you," I said, standing up. "Harper," Greg said as I reached the door. He paused, looking genuinely unnerved by how cleanly I was amputating Caleb from my life. You seem remarkably composed." I looked back over my shoulder. Through the frosted glass, I could see the blurry shapes of the employees outside, gossiping, typing, entirely unaware that the man they were memorializing as a hero had just been financially and professionally executed. "I died last night, Greg," I said, the ghost of the bullet throbbing in my chest one last time. "This is just what's left." I walked out of the office, the heavy door clicking shut behind me. The severance was complete. He had no fiancé, no safety net, and now, no career. But I wasn't done. A rat in a corner will always try to bite its way out, and I needed to make sure Caleb had no teeth left when he tried. Rain slicked the windows of the Oak Room, distorting the headlights of the traffic crawling along Fifth Avenue. The steakhouse smelled of aged leather, charred ribeye, and the expensive, peaty single malt scotch that men in $1,000 suits drank to pretend they were rugged. I sat at a corner booth, tracing the condensation on my water glass. My phone sat face down on the mahogany table. Harrison Trent was exactly on time. He didn't walk. He glided through the restaurant with the casual, heavy entitlement of a man who owned entire city blocks. He was 15 years older than Riley, his hair a distinguished silver at the temples, his posture straight as a steel beam. When the maitre d' pointed toward my booth, Harrison's eyes locked onto me. There was no warmth in them, just the cold appraisal of a businessman sizing up an unexpected variable. He slid into the leather booth opposite me, unbuttoning his suit jacket. "Ms. Sullivan, your voicemail was incredibly vague, but you mentioned it concerned a mutual liability. I don't like riddles." "I don't like them either, Mr. Trent," I said, keeping my voice low, pitched just under the ambient hum of the dining room. "Thank you for meeting me." The waiter materialized, dropping off a heavy crystal glass of scotch for Harrison without being asked. Harrison took a sip, the ice clinking sharply. I understand your fiancé was involved in an altercation. Tragic. But I fail to see how his misfortune impacts my firm's investments with Apex Communications. Caleb Davis isn't my fiancé anymore, I corrected smoothly. And the liability I mentioned isn't financial. At least, not yet. Tassa? I reached into my leather tote and pulled out a manila envelope. The paper was stiff and dry. It made a crisp, scraping sound as I slid it across the polished wood toward him. Harrison didn't touch it. He just stared at it, his jaw tightening incrementally. What is this? A copy of the police report from the incident in the Level C parking garage, I said, leaning back against the tufted leather of the booth. Along with sworn witness statements, including mine, and a transcript of the 911 call. Harrison finally moved his hand, his heavy gold wedding band catching the dim, amber light of the restaurant chandelier. He pulled the flap open and slid the documents out. He didn't rush. He read with the practiced, methodical speed of a man who digested complex contracts for a living. I watched his face. I expected a flush of anger, perhaps a clenched fist. But Harrison Trent was a predator, not prey. His expression simply turned to stone. The air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. My wife, Harrison said softly, his eyes tracing the line of text where Detective Ramirez had noted Riley's frantic departure in a yellow cab, leaving a bleeding man on the concrete. She was with him, I confirmed. The words tasted like cold pennies, but I forced them out evenly. She has been with him for the better part of 6 months, from what I can gather from the hotel receipts I found in his cloud storage. I included printouts of those in the back. Harrison flipped to the back. He stared at the itemized bills from the Four Seasons. 2 blocks from my apartment. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive in a sickening, microscopic way. Why are you giving this to me? Harrison asked, finally looking up. His voice was terrifyingly calm. Revenge? Efficiency, I answered honestly. Caleb is already gone. I severed his employment at Apex this morning. He has no job, and he no longer has access to my home or my assets. But Riley... I paused, feeling the phantom ache in my chest throb once, a rhythmic reminder of a death that never happened. Riley still has the protection of your name and your bank accounts. She stood there and watched the man she supposedly loved choke on his own blood, and her only instinct was to run so she wouldn't lose her black card. Harrison's eyes narrowed. He looked at the paperwork again, then back at me. He was calculating the fallout. The prenuptial agreement, the social embarrassment, the leverage. She told me she was at a charity committee meeting, Harrison murmured, almost to himself. She came home shaking, told me a vagrant had startled her on the street. She's a very good liar, I said. But the cameras in the garage don't lie. Neither do the hotel receipts. What you do with this information is entirely your business, Mr. Trent. I just thought you preferred to know when an asset in your portfolio was depreciating. I stood up, pulling my trench coat tight around my waist. Harrison didn't try to stop me. He was already pulling his cell phone from his breast pocket, his thumb hovering over the screen. Ms. Sullivan, he said, his voice stopping me just as I turned to leave. I looked back. You survived an ugly thing, Harrison said, his eyes finally showing a flicker of grim respect. Most people would be in therapy. You're orchestrating a demolition. Therapy costs money, I replied flatly. Demolition is free. I walked out into the rain, pulling my collar up against the chill. The air smelled like wet asphalt and ozone. It was the best thing I had smelled in days. 3 days later, the demolition was complete. It didn't happen with a loud explosion. It happened the way high society ruins people, quietly, ruthlessly, and with agonizing precision. I was standing in the produce aisle of an organic grocery store, numbly squeezing a bruised avocado, when I heard the frantic, squeaking sound of rubber soles against linoleum. Harper. The voice was a ragged croak. I didn't flinch. I just slowly placed the avocado back onto the green felt display and turned around. Riley stood at the end of the aisle. If I hadn't known her for 4 years, I wouldn't have recognized her. The manicured, perfectly styled country club wife was entirely gone. She was wearing a pair of sweatpants that looked like they had been slept in, and a bulky, oversized college hoodie. Her hair was pulled back into a greasy, uneven knot, and her face was stripped bare of makeup, revealing splotchy red skin and dark, cavernous bags under her eyes. She looked feverish. I pushed my shopping cart a few inches forward, the wheels rattling loudly in the quiet store. "Riley, you look terrible." She flinched as if I had struck her. She took a step toward me, her hands twisting the bottom hem of her hoodie into a tight, frantic knot. "He locked me out," she gasped, her voice trembling so violently her teeth chattered. "Harrison, I tried to buy a coffee yesterday morning, and the card declined. Then my phone service was cut off. I went home, and my keycard to the elevator didn't work. The doorman told me I wasn't permitted in the building." I picked up a lemon, inspecting the yellow rind, completely unbothered by her presence. The store smelled of fresh basil and citrus, a sharp, clean contrast to the aura of desperation radiating from her. "Harrison is a practical man," I noted, placing the lemon into my basket. "I imagine his lawyers are drafting the divorce papers as we speak. With cause, of course." Riley let out a choked, wet sob. She reached out, her fingers digging into the metal wire of my shopping cart, anchoring herself so she wouldn't collapse. "You did this!" she hissed, a sudden venomous spit of anger breaking through the panic. "You told him! You ruined my life, Harper!" "Over what? A stupid mistake?" I stopped moving. The ambient noise of the grocery store, the soft jazz playing on the overhead speakers, the beep of the registers in the distance, seemed to fade into a dull hum. I looked down at her hands gripping my cart. Her knuckles were white. "A mistake is forgetting to pay a parking ticket, Riley," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper that forced her to lean in to hear it. "Sleeping with my fiancé in my bed while I was out of town is a choice. Watching him take a bullet to the chest and running away in your designer boots so your husband wouldn't cut off your allowance? That's not a mistake. That's a revelation of character." "Caleb was going to leave you," she cried, the lie tumbling out of her in a desperate bid to hurt me. "He loved me. He told me I made him feel alive." I let out a short, dry laugh. It sounded like cracking dry wood. "Did he? How romantic. Did he tell you that before or after he bled all over his suede loafers?" Riley's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She was drowning in the realization that her words had absolutely no power over me. She expected me to cry, to yell, to fight over Caleb like he was a prize. But the pedestal she thought we were fighting on had been pulverized. "If he loves you so much," I continued smoothly, prying her rigid fingers off my cart one by one, "you should go to him. I'm sure he'd love the company. Assuming you can stomach the smell of the hospital ward, of course." "I have no money, Harper," she whimpered, her anger collapsing back into pathetic begging. "I have nowhere to sleep. My friends, none of them are answering my calls. Harrison threatened them. Then I suggest you find a shelter, I said, gripping the handle of my cart. Or a job. I hear Apex Communications has an unexpected opening in their PR department. I pushed the cart past her. She didn't try to stop me again. She just stood there in the middle of the organic produce section, a ghost, haunting a life she no longer belonged to, weeping into her dirty hands. I didn't look back. The smell of fresh basil followed me all the way to the register. Cardboard boxes have a distinct, dry smell, a dusty, papery scent that signals the end of an era. I spent Friday evening packing up Caleb's life. I didn't fold his clothes. I didn't carefully wrap his expensive colognes or his vanity awards. I dumped them into U-Haul boxes with ruthless, mechanical efficiency. By 9 o'clock, the apartment was half empty, the echoes of my footsteps bouncing off the bare hardwood floors. It was liberating. With every box I taped shut, the phantom ache under my ribs lessened, the heavy, suffocating weight of my old life lifting fraction by fraction. My phone buzzed on the kitchen island. Unknown number. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately buzzed again. I picked it up, pressing it to my ear without saying a word. Harper? The voice was hollow, raspy, and thick with painkillers. Caleb, who gave you this number? I asked, leaning against the cool marble of the countertop. I had changed my cell number 2 days ago. Greg at the office. Caleb coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made my skin crawl. Harper, please don't hang up. Please. You have 2 minutes, Caleb. Speak. They fired me. He choked out, the disbelief still raw and bleeding in his voice. Greg came to the hospital. He brought HR. They made me sign a severance agreement while I was literally hooked up to an IV. He said I was a PR liability. You are, I agreed, tracing the veining in the marble with my fingernail. He knew about Riley. He knew everything. A heavy, ragged breath hissed through the phone. You told him. You went to my boss and you destroyed my career. I informed your employer of a volatile situation that threatened their largest client accounts. I corrected coldly. You destroyed your own career the second you unzipped your pants for the wife of the firm's biggest investor. I was shot! Caleb screamed, his voice cracking violently. The sudden outburst was immediately followed by a groan of pure agony as the movement tore at his healing collarbone. I took a bullet, Harper. I almost died. But you didn't, I said softly. I did. The words echoed in my head, a secret only I would ever know. I died on that concrete. I choked on my own blood while you cried over your shoes. You only caught a fraction of the pain you were perfectly willing to let me endure. I'm coming home, Caleb demanded, his voice dropping into a pathetic, wheezing threat. They discharged me this afternoon. I'm sitting in a cab right now. I'm coming back to the apartment. No, you're not. My name is on the lease, Harper. My name is on the deed, Caleb. I reminded him, my voice completely devoid of emotion. You never signed the lease. You just lived here, and your key doesn't work anymore. The locks were changed on Tuesday. Silence stretched over the line, broken only by the sound of traffic passing outside his cab window and his own ragged breathing. Where are my things? He finally asked. The fight was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, sinking terror. Packed in boxes, I left them with the doorman. He has instructions to release them to you, but you are not permitted past the lobby. Harper, I have no money. My accounts are frozen. I have a shattered shoulder. I can't even carry a box. Where am I supposed to go? His voice broke. He was crying. Genuine, terrified tears of a narcissist who had suddenly found himself completely alone in a world that no longer catered to him. "Call Riley," I suggested smoothly. "I hear she's single now." "She blocked my number." He sobbed. "She won't answer. Harper, please. We were going to get married. We spent 3 years together. You can't just throw me onto the street like a stray dog. I'm injured. I need you." "You don't need me, Caleb. You need an audience. You need a nurse, a maid, and a bank account. I resigned from all 3 positions." "I'll die out here," he whimpered. "Then die," I said. I pulled the phone away from my ear and tapped the red button. The line went dead. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, listening to the absolute pristine silence of my apartment. The air didn't smell like his heavy cologne anymore. It didn't smell like his stale coffee or the expensive leather of his shoes. It smelled like nothing, and it was the most beautiful scent in the world. Healing is an ugly, non-linear thing. It doesn't happen in a montage with uplifting music. It happens in the quiet, brutal hours of the morning, in the sudden, jarring moments when the past tries to claw its way back to the surface. 2 months after the shooting, I woke up choking. My eyes snapped open in the dark, my hands flying to my chest, my fingers digging desperately into the cotton of my t-shirt. I was gasping, my lungs burning, waiting for the metallic taste of blood to flood my mouth. I kicked the blankets off, my skin slick with a cold, terrifying sweat. I sat up on the edge of the bed, my bare feet hitting the hardwood floor. Breathe in, breathe out. The apartment was silent. Outside the window, a garbage truck rumbled down the street, its brakes squealing loudly in the pre-dawn quiet. I pulled my hands away from my chest. My skin was unbroken. There was no bullet hole. There was no blood on the floor. I walked into the bathroom and flicked on the harsh overhead light. I gripped the edges of the porcelain sink, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, my hair a tangled mess, my pupils dilated from the adrenaline of the nightmare. I looked like a ghost, and in a way, I was. The memories of the timeline where I died didn't fade. They didn't blur into a vague dream. They remained razor sharp, etched into my neurochemistry. I remembered the exact temperature of the concrete. I remembered the heavy, suffocating pressure in my chest as my lung collapsed. I remembered the specific, pathetic pitch of Caleb's voice as he yelled at the shooter, his chest puffed out in a display of toxic, lethal arrogance. But as I stared at myself in the mirror, the terror slowly began to drain away, replaced by a deep, anchoring exhaustion. I survived. I stepped back. I turned on the faucet, letting the cold water run over my wrists. The shock of the temperature grounded me. In the weeks since I packed up his life, I had heard whispers through the corporate grapevine. Greg from Apex had eagerly supplied the gossip when I officially transferred my accounts to a rival firm, taking millions of dollars in billing with me. Caleb hadn't bounced back. The bullet had done permanent nerve damage to his arm. Without my father's connections and the glossy veneer of his job at Apex, he had become just another bitter, unemployed man with a tragic story no one wanted to hear. He was living in a cheap rental in Queens, burning through his severance package on painkillers and cheap takeout. Riley's fate was even worse. Harris and Trent had executed their prenup with the ruthlessness of a military tribunal. She walked away with practically nothing. The last I heard, she had moved back to Ohio to live in her mother's basement, entirely erased from the Manhattan social scene she had sold her soul to climb. They got exactly what they deserved. The universe had course corrected. I dried my face with a towel and walked out into the living room. The apartment was filled with boxes again. But this time, they were mine. I had sold the place. The profit was substantial, enough to buy a cottage on the coast of Maine, far away from the concrete, the exhaust fumes, and the towering glass skyscrapers that trapped the heat and the lies of this city. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the city skyline. The sky was turning a bruised purple, the first hints of dawn creeping over the horizon. The city looked beautiful from up here, silent and glittering, completely detached from the grit and blood of the streets below. I touched the center of my chest one last time. The phantom ache was still there, a dull, quiet throb. I suspected it always would be. It was the price of a second chance, a reminder of what happens when you make yourself a shield for someone who would only ever use you as a stepping stone. But as the sun crested the horizon, casting a warm, golden light across the empty hardwood floor, I realized something vital. I didn't hate them anymore. I didn't feel anger or spite, or even a lingering sense of victory. I just felt profoundly, beautifully indifferent. I turned away from the window, picked up my heavy winter coat from the back of a chair, and walked toward the front door. I didn't look back at the empty space. I didn't say goodbye to the ghosts. I left my keys on the glass entryway table, stepped out into the hallway, and let the heavy door click shut behind me. The lock engaged with a solid, metallic thud. The sound was absolute. The sound was final. It was the sound of a woman walking away, entirely whole, into a life that was finally, truly, her own. That's the end of Harper's story. The ghosts of our past don't always leave us, but sometimes the greatest victory is realizing you don't have to carry their weight anymore. She stepped back from a bullet and watched the dominoes of deception fall exactly as they were meant to. If this deeply human, unapologetic revenge story hit a nerve, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more raw, cynical reborn drama narratives. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs the ultimate reminder. Never play the martyr for a coward. Drop a comment below. Would you have stepped back?